The fire had gone out again. Yolanda's hands, trembling and raw, fumbled with the flint in the dark, scraping it against the dull edge of her knife, until the smallest spark leapt, caught, and died in the cold ashes. Her breath came in short bursts. The air inside the cabin felt heavy damp with a cold that clung to her bones. Her fingers were cracked from the wind, and her chest ached full and sore in that familiar, relentless way. She pressed the heel of her palm into her breast. No use. The milk wouldn't stop. It never stopped. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded dog through the peaks of the Sierra Tarahumara. The moon cast a silver haze across the rough wooden floor where her shawl lay crumpled near the hearth. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's tortillas and the stale broth that barely counted as soup. Hunger was nothing new. Neither was grief. But this night was different. She sat up slowly from the thin mat of woven yucca fibers and crawled to the far wall, lifting the latch to the old wooden trunk. Inside was the only piece of him she hadn't buried, his rebozo still folded, the way she'd wrapped it around her waist when she'd carried him. She pressed her face into it, breathed in what little scent remained, smoke-crushed chamomile milk. Her body still prepared for a baby who no longer woke. No cry, no warmth, no reason. "I'm still here," she whispered to the silence. "But I don't know why." She rose dizzy from hunger and opened the cabin door to the pale dawn. Her feet crunched over frost-bitten earth as she crossed the yard toward the mesquite tree, where the graves lay under a ring of stones. One for her grandmother, Esperanza. One for her son. No name carved, no date. Just silence and earth. She knelt beside them, placing a small clay cup of warm anise tea between the stones. Her grandmother had always liked it in the mornings, even when her hands had begun to shake, and she forgot the names of birds. Yolanda traced the shape of the larger stone and murmured in broken Apache, the way Esperanza had taught her when she was little, and the sun still rose with promise. Chishi ni iji, gohwe nihiu beesh. You are strong even now. Coffee for your bones. She paused, then laid her hand on the smaller grave. Forgive me, mi niño. The words caught in her throat. She spoke them every day, though they changed nothing. Behind her, a hawk shrieked from the cliffs. A bad omen, her grandmother would have said. Death in the air. But there was nothing left to die here, only what refused to go. She stood and turned back toward the cabin, her skirts brushing the dried grasses. That was when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of hooves. Distant, steady. A horse. Her heart kicked. No one visited her. No one dared. She crouched behind the mesquite body, still as a rock. The rider came into view, slowly emerging from the dust trail like a mirage. A tall man, broad-shouldered, riding a black Mustang. His long black hair was unbound and swept back by the wind. He wore worn leather pants and a woven tunic, Apache beads, strung across his chest. Across his front, strapped to him in a bundle of pale cloth, was something small, too small to be anything but a child. He didn't stop at the gate. He rode straight up to her cabin, dismounted, and stood there without knocking. Yolanda moved cautiously, stepping out from the shadow of the tree, every part of her telling her to run. But she didn't. Something in his stillness, rigid yet desperate, held her fast. As she approached, his eyes met hers. They were dark, like volcanic stone. Unreadable, but burning. He didn't speak. Instead, he pulled the bundle from his chest and unwrapped it. It was a baby. A boy. Maybe 6 or 7 months old. His skin was pale, almost blue at the lips. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his tiny hands curled tight like claws, his eyes barely opened. The man held the baby out. Leche, he said, his Spanish thick with accent. Mi hijo, She froze. "No hey, madre," she asked quietly, eyes darting to the man's face. He shook his head once, then pointed to the child. Muere. The word struck her like a blade. The wind bit at her face. Her body screamed milk, pain, heat, grief. Her arms lifted before her mind caught up. She took the child. He was far too light. Bones and shallow breath. Fever sweat soaked the cloth near his neck. His skin was cold. Her heart pounded in her ears. It had been 3 months since she'd held her own son. 3 months since his weight had been against her chest. She stepped backward, holding the baby against her breast. "Come inside." The man followed without a word. Inside, she stoked the fire to life with shaking hands, then sat in her old rocking chair. She pulled her blouse open, positioned the child carefully, and offered him her breast. At first, he didn't move. Just lay there, mouth slack, as if the effort was too great. She cupped the back of his head and leaned close, letting a drop of milk roll into his lips. "Vamos, mi amor," she whispered. Fight. Another drop. Then another. At last, a tiny shift, the baby's mouth opened, slightly closed, then opened again. A weak suckle, then a second. Her body responded like a dam breaking. Milk flowed. She glanced up. The man was standing like a statue near the door, eyes fixed on her, unmoving. She saw the flicker of something in him, relief or fear or both. "What's his name?" she asked softly. The man pressed a hand to his chest. "Takani." Then to the child. "Tawake." "Yolanda," she said, her voice low. They stayed like that for a long time, the fire crackling, the child nursing, and the man watching with the silence of someone who had no more words. When the baby finally fell asleep at her breast, her heart twisted. Her blouse was damp, her arms ached, but she didn't move. She couldn't. "He needs more than one feeding," she said. Takani nodded once. "You'll come back tomorrow?" He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a single word, "Si." She wasn't sure whether to feel afraid or alive. Maybe both. As he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of blood along the edge of his tunic, dried brown old. She didn't ask. Instead, she looked down at the boy. His hand had closed around her finger. Tight. So tight for something so close to death. The wind rattled the door. And for the first time in months, Yolanda didn't feel alone. "Mi mamita no despierta," the child's father said, placing the dying baby in my arms. The words clung to Yolanda's mind long after Takaani disappeared down the dirt trail, the hoofbeats of his horse swallowed by wind and distance. She stood in the doorway of the cabin for a long time, holding the sleeping child against her chest, listening to the soft rasp of his breath. His tiny body felt lighter than it had the night before, but warmer now, less fragile. There was color in his lips again. Faint, but there. The fire had died again. She didn't move. Her legs ached from standing, but she feared that if she sat down, she might not be able to get back up. She was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. It was something deeper, like her bones had turned to ash and forgotten how to carry her. She looked down. The baby had a bit of dried milk clinging to the corner of his mouth. His face, though drawn and hollow, was softer than yesterday. She wiped the milk away with the edge of her sleeve. Tawake. She repeated the name in her head until it felt like breath. Inside, the cabin felt tighter. Not smaller, just more full. Like the ghosts had made space for someone new. She finally forced herself to move, to lay the child gently in the old wicker cradle by the hearth. It creaked under his weight or the absence of it, and she patted the sides with folded shawls. He stirred, then stilled again. She kept her eyes on him while she warmed leftover atole from the night before. It was thick, starchy, barely sweet. She ate it standing up. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Her stomach burned with the first few bites. She swallowed them down anyway. What now? She asked the fire. It didn't answer. By mid-morning, the child woke with a cough that barely sounded like one, a dry rasp, weak and whimpering. She lifted him carefully and checked his skin, no fever, but his lips were dry again. Her milk was no longer a curse. It had become a clock. His next feeding couldn't wait long. When she sat in the rocker and opened her blouse, he took her breast more quickly this time. Still slow, still weak, but something in him had remembered. Some instinct, some drive that didn't need language. She pressed her cheek to his temple and closed her eyes. "Come back to us, little one," she whispered. "There's still room in the world for you." The door creaked around midday. Her head jerked up instinct, pulling her back into herself. She stood too fast, heart-hammering, ready to shout, but it was only a goat sniffing near her woodpile. She watched it for a moment before sitting again. After the baby fell asleep, she took him outside, wrapped tightly against her chest in a cotton sling. She had to gather herbs before the sun dipped too low behind the mountains. Not far, just near the edge of the arroyo, where her grandmother's wild garden still crept between the rocks. The cold had burned most of the leaves, but Gordolobo remained its stalks, gray-green, still offering something. She clipped them slowly, letting her hands remember the rhythm of care. Every few minutes, she checked the baby's breath. "I'm not doing this again," she murmured to herself. The lie burned in her throat. By the time she returned to the cabin, dusk was pushing against the windows. She lit the lamp with flint and oil-boiled water and laid Tawaki in the cradle again. He whimpered once. Then, as if reassured, drifted off. She rocked in the chair with her arms crossed, staring at the flicker of the flame. He said he would come back. Did that mean tomorrow, every day, just once? She didn't know. And she hated not knowing. Her body still ached from the milk, not painfully, but constantly. A presence, a reminder. When her own baby had died, it had taken weeks for her milk to slow. The midwife in the next village had offered herbs to dry it out, but Yolanda had refused. She wasn't ready. She didn't know what ready looked like. Now here she was, still full, still aching, still giving. She fell asleep in the chair, chin tucked against her chest. At some point in the night, Tawake began to cry, weak but sharper. It woke her instantly. She was on her feet before she could think, lifting him to her chest and murmuring soft nonsense until he latched on. This time he drank longer, more surely. The chair rocked with them back and forth, slow and warm like her grandmother used to do. The moonlight caught in the cracks of the window. The fire whispered in the stone hearth, a world of silence except for the small sound of life at her breast. By morning she was sore from sleeping upright, and her eyes were gritty with smoke and interrupted dreams. But Tawake's cheeks were slightly less hollow. His eyes opened wider when she spoke. He gripped her finger this time tight, almost as if it meant something. He was still here. She stepped outside to dump the wash basin when she heard the sound again, distant hooves. Just one horse moving slow, deliberate. Her pulse jumped. She turned toward the trail, breath-catching. There he was. Takaani. He looked exactly the same as before, tall, sharp, unshaken. But this time there was something different in his expression. A question, maybe. Or relief. He didn't dismount immediately. He just sat there, horse shifting beneath him, eyes fixed on her. She couldn't read his face. She motioned for him to come. He dismounted and walked to her, slowly stopping only when he reached the porch. No words, just silence. And then finally, the smallest nod. She opened the door and stepped aside. Inside the cabin was warm again. Tawake lay sleeping in the cradle wrapped in the same shawl. Takani crouched beside him, one hand on the edge of the cradle. His face didn't change, but his shoulders dropped slightly. A loosening, a letting go. Yolanda crossed her arms and watched him. He drank more today, she said. He's stronger. Takani nodded once, then said gracias. The word was heavy, like he wasn't used to saying it. Yolanda only shrugged. He needs more. My milk isn't magic. He's still thin. Still weak. She paused. You'll come tomorrow. Takani looked up at her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. They were steady, direct. See, he said. And with that, he stood, gave one last glance to his son, and left. As the door closed behind him, Yolanda exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at Tawake. His chest rose and fell slow and even. She pressed her hand gently to his back. There were still so many things she didn't know. Why Takaani had come to her. Why he trusted her. What would happen if the village found out? But she knew one thing for sure, this child wanted to live. And somehow she was the one who had to help him do it. He was too light, too still, and yet I felt his soul fight for each drop I gave him. The baby didn't cry. That was what scared her most. Yolanda sat stiff in the rocking chair, Tawaki pressed against her breast, his mouth barely working the rhythm, fragile and uneven. His tiny body felt like bird bones wrapped in fever. He clung to her not with strength, but need an instinct deeper than muscle. She had seen calves born too early, kittens left in cold barns. She had felt life slip away in her hands before. But this child he wasn't letting go. Not yet. Her back ached, but she didn't move. She barely blinked, afraid to break whatever thread kept him tethered. The only sound in the cabin was the faint sucking, the creak of wood under her weight, and the fire's occasional sigh. She whispered to him, not words, not songs, just breath. His forehead pressed to her chest, damp and hot. She adjusted him carefully, keeping his head high so he wouldn't choke. His fingers, like matchsticks, curled against her collarbone. When he finally let go, she didn't know if he was satisfied or simply too tired to continue. She held him close anyway, watching his chest. One breath, then another. Still here. She swaddled him in Esperanza's old shawl, the one that smelled of cedar and wild oregano, and laid him back in the cradle. He whimpered. Not a cry, a flicker. But it was something. Yolanda crouched next to him on the floor, elbows on her knees. Her dress smelled of smoke and sour milk. She didn't care. She just watched him, willing him to stay. The sun was barely rising. Pale light filtered through the cracks in the shutters, catching dust in the air. Her body throbbed, an ache in her chest, in her lower back, in the deep pit of her belly. But it was a familiar pain. She could live with it. She had. Her stomach growled. She stood slowly, fingers cramped, and went to the hearth. There was half a tortilla left from the day before, a bit of bean mash in the pot. She ate, standing, chewing, without taste. At midday, she boiled water for herbs and washed the cloth diapers, hanging them near the fire to dry. The baby slept, then stirred, then drank again. She noticed a change, slight, but there. He latched faster. His hands moved more. His lips were less cracked. A step, a seed, something to hope for. Later, she took him outside, wrapped against her chest. The sun had warmed the edges of the earth, and a few late-season bees drifted between the mesquite and wild sage. She walked slowly along the path behind the cabin, picking dried gordolobo and yucca pods, whispering plant names as she passed. Medicine, she murmured into the baby's crown. If you stay, I'll teach you everything." His head twitched at her voice. By the time they returned to the cabin, the light was shifting. She had just laid him down again when she heard the soft thump of hooves. Her pulse jumped. She opened the door before he could knock. Takani stood on the porch, his eyes dark beneath the shadow of his hair. He didn't smile. He never did. But he gave a nod that felt like something close. "He ate twice," Yolanda said. More than before. Takani stepped inside, scanning the room quickly. When he saw the baby sleeping, he exhaled through his nose, a breath that carried weight. He crouched beside the cradle, touched the blanket gently. His fingers were scarred and calloused, but careful. "He's strong," Takani said. "Not yet," Yolanda replied. "But he wants to be." They didn't speak more. She poured a bit of chamomile tea, offered him a cup. He took it. They sat at the small table, her on the bench, him on a stump she used for chopping herbs. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just wide. After a while, she said, "What happened to his mother?" Takaani looked up slowly, his jaw tensed. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Soldados," he said. "Federales, near the river. We were running from a patrol." He paused. She was carrying him. He cried. They heard. She hid him. Then he didn't finish. Yolanda didn't ask him to. She stared into her tea, then said quietly, "I buried mine under the mesquite." Takani's gaze shifted toward the window, toward the tree. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. He finished the tea, stood, and looked once more at the baby. "Tomorrow," he said, and left. Yolanda stood in the doorway again, watching the trail long after his silhouette vanished into the copper light. The baby stirred. She went to him. That night, as she rocked him in the chair, she hummed an old song Esperanza used to sing. A lullaby in Apache, rough on her tongue, but soft in memory. "Ba hashe yaji bikehgo nasha." "My little one, walk the good path." She fed him again before dawn. His eyes opened, truly opened, for the first time since he arrived. They were dark and glassy, but aware. When he finished, he turned his head toward her voice. "You're staying," she whispered. The fire popped once. The wind shifted. At sunrise, she walked down to the river for water. She carried Tawake in the sling tucked close against her chest. Her back hurt from the weight, but she didn't mind. Not yet. As she reached the bend in the path, she noticed footprints near the edge, fresh ones. Not Takani's, booted. Heavy. She frowned, scanned the trees. Nothing. Still, she felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck. She filled the bucket fast and quiet and made her way home. When she arrived, she set the water inside and bolted the door. She went to the window and peered out through the shutter slats. There was nothing but wind and trees. But the feeling stayed. She held Tawake close that night, tighter than usual. Somewhere deep in her gut, a worry began to bloom. She had kept to herself for years. People didn't bother her out here. Until now. And if someone had seen him, the baby or the man who came each morning, it wouldn't take long for the whispers to begin. Her hands trembled as she lit the lamp. Yolanda knew the village, and she knew what fear made them capable of. The same mouths that once begged my grandmother for cures now spit at her bloodline. The mark wasn't there the day before. Yolanda saw it just after sunrise, after feeding Tawake and stepping out to shake out the wash. A tight circle of white stones, smoothed river rocks, placed neatly surrounded the front of her cabin. Not a mistake. Not nature. She stopped mid-step, her breath catching. She knew exactly what it meant. A curse. Her grandmother had taught her that when she was 10. If they fear you, they'll use the stones. Protection, they'll call it. But it's hatred under the skin. She knelt, picking one up. Smooth, pale, fresh from the riverbed. Someone had been here. Someone had walked up to her home while she slept with a baby in her arms. While the fire died low. While her door was bolted shut but not invincible. Her first instinct was to kick the stones away to scatter them in anger. But she didn't. Not yet. She set the one in her hand down gently, as if handling something rotten that still had teeth. Her stomach churned. Tawake whimpered from inside. The wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of juniper and old wood smoke. The village was still asleep. She knew how they moved slow and quiet until Sunday, when the bells rang and the gossip began. She didn't need to guess where it started. There were only a few who might have seen Takaani ride out after dawn. Ramiro Vasquez, or one of his men. Maybe old Florencio's boy he hunted rabbits near the arroyo. Maybe someone had followed the hoof prints. It didn't matter. The whispers had begun. Yolanda went back inside, locked the door, and lit the fire again. Her hands shook as she stirred the pot of leftover masa and anise. She watched Tawake breathe. His little chest rose and fell steadily now with more force than the day before. That was all that mattered. She nursed him again, not just for his hunger, but for the calm it gave her the grounding. The act that made her body feel like it still had a purpose. The ache in her breasts wasn't as sharp today. Her milk was flowing more freely, as if her body had accepted him now, claimed him. But the fear crept in anyway. She spent the morning pretending she didn't feel it. She swept washed linens, boiled water, each task done harder than needed, faster than usual. The stones waited outside like sentries, silent and smug. When the knock came at noon, she nearly dropped the kettle. She stood still, heart pounding, and waited. Another knock, softer this time. Then a voice. Yolanda, she blinked. It wasn't a man's voice, and not one she feared. She opened the door slowly. Luisa Torres stood there in a shawl, too thin for the wind, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She didn't speak right away. Just looked at Yolanda with tired eyes, then down to the baby on her hip. "I brought yerba santa," she said. Yolanda let her in. Luisa had always been quiet. Her Spanish was laced with the rhythm of the Raramuri tongue, soft and slow, like river stones turning over in the current. She lived closer to the canyon's edge, farther from town. Alone since her sister left for Durango and their father died last winter. People spoke about her in the same tones they used for Yolanda, too, quiet, too odd, too outside the circle. But she had kind hands and knew plants better than most priests knew scripture. Yolanda took the bundle and unfolded it. Yerba Santa, dried elderflower, a pinch of chile. The kind of gift women gave each other when no one else would. Luisa looked around the cabin. "They cursed your door." Yolanda nodded. "I heard Ramiro at the cantina last night," Luisa said. "Said the witch had a new savage lover. Said you were feeding his bastard." Yolanda's chest went tight. Luisa glanced at Tawake. "That him," Yolanda nodded again. Her voice didn't come. Luisa stepped closer to the cradle. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back. She reached down and gently touched the baby's arm, then lifted his wrist. She felt the pulse like a midwife would. "He's strong," she said softly. "Will be more if they don't tear you apart first." Yolanda didn't mean to cry, but her throat burned. She turned away quickly and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. The shame came too fast. She hated it. "I didn't ask for him," she said. "But he's here. He needs me." "That's all it takes," Luisa replied. They sat in silence for a while, drinking bitter tea and listening to the wind scratch against the wood. Before Luisa left, She bent down again to look at the baby. "He's got the eyes of a hunter," she murmured. "But he clings like he knows who saved him." Yolanda nodded, barely holding herself together. When the door closed behind Luisa, the room felt heavier. She unwrapped the yerba santa and set the leaves to boil. The scent filled the cabin warm and sharp. It reminded her of Esperanza, her voice rising above pain, her hands mixing crushed leaves with honey and spit. Magic and science blended into survival. She rocked Tawake, and for the first time he cooed. A sound. A soft one, but full of life. She laughed quietly. "That's right. You tell them you're here." That night she stayed near the window, eyes flicking toward the darkness beyond the trees. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. When Takani came at dawn, she met him at the door with the baby in her arms and her jaw tight. "They're talking," she said. "They saw you? They marked my door." He looked past her, saw the stones, and didn't speak for a long time. "They'll come," she added. "They always do." Takani's face didn't change, but his shoulders squared. "Then we feed him now," he said, stepping inside. She nodded, closed the door behind them. She nursed Tawake while Takani watched his hands fidgeting, unusual for him. He stood to the side like a man guarding a fire he couldn't touch. His presence didn't calm her, but it didn't frighten her either. He was steady like rock beneath floodwater. When the baby had his fill and drifted into sleep, Takani stood. His eyes moved once more to the stones outside the window. "I bring meat tomorrow," he said, "and bow." "Why a bow?" He looked at her. "For watching." He left without another word. Yolanda stood alone, hands still warm from the child. She looked out again at the white stones encircling her home. They were no longer just a warning. They were a line someone meant to cross. "If you leave, he dies. If you stay, I burn." The baby wouldn't stop crying. Yolanda paced the cabin with Tawake pressed tight to her chest, her hand cradling his head, murmuring soft nothings that used to work. But he twisted restless, his body hot with frustration or fever or both. She had fed him, changed him, rocked him until her own knees ached. Still, he wailed. She didn't blame him. It had been 3 days since the stones appeared. 2 since Luisa's visit. 1 since Takaani brought a bundle of smoked meat and a bow strung with sinew. The meat still hung near the rafters. The bow leaned by the door. The crying cut through the walls like a knife, constant and raw. Each sound reminded her how alone they were, how far from help. She glanced toward the window. No sign of him. Takaani hadn't come that morning. He always came at dawn. Always. Yolanda whispered against the baby's forehead, her voice cracking. "He's just late. He'll come." But her heart wasn't sure anymore. She laid Tawake down on the pallet, wrapped him tight, and stepped outside. The sun was high, the wind sharp. The trees didn't move, but the air did, swirling around her ankles like smoke. No horse tracks, no broken twigs. She stepped back inside and bolted the door. Then she sat by the hearth and watched the child scream. She didn't cry. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, his voice was hoarse. He had drained both breasts, but still searched, nuzzling, desperate. Her milk was thinner today, not flowing as fast. Stress, she thought. Fear. The kind that makes the body tighten and the heart race. He needed more than she could give. She needed him. Takani. That night the wind picked up. Branches tapped the window. Somewhere deep in the trees, a dog barked once, then again farther off. A warning or a signal. Yolanda sat with the bow in her lap. She'd never used one. Esperanza had taught her herbs and bones, blood and poultices. Not weapons, but her hands knew how to string tension. That was close enough. Tawake had gone quiet finally, his breathing shallow but steady. He slept wrapped against her chest, his skin hot against her collarbone. She didn't sleep. Just before dawn, hooves again. Soft, slow. She stood before the door, heart thudding in her ribs. Not fast like fear, but strong like readiness. He knocked once. She opened the door. Takani stood in the silver light, blood dried on his tunic, a cut above his brow. His lip split. Her stomach dropped. "What happened, Trap?" he said. "Two men. North Ridge." Ramiro, he didn't answer. Just stepped inside, one hand gripping his ribs. She shut the door behind him, bolted it, and helped him to the chair. He didn't groan, didn't wince, just sat down slowly, his breath tight. "You should have stayed away," she whispered, crouching beside him. "If I stayed away, he dies," he said. She didn't argue. She fetched water, cleaned the wound above his eye, laid crushed sage on his lip. They didn't speak for a long time. Tawake stirred. "He needs more," Yolanda said. "My milk's thinning." Takani nodded, chest heaving with a slow breath. "I bring him meat. Broth. Soon. You can't go out again." His eyes locked on hers. "I have to." She stood. "No. Not again. If I don't, they'll come." "They'll come anyway," she snapped. "Whether you run or not." Takaani pushed himself upright with effort. "If I run, they chase me. Not you." She looked at him, stunned. "So you want me to stay here while they talk, while they threaten the door at night?" His silence answered for him. She stepped back, eyes burning. "If you leave, he dies. If you stay, I burn." She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but once it was out, it filled the room. Chakani lowered his head. "I can't lose him," he said softly. She turned away, arms crossed over her chest. The fire cracked behind her. She watched its shadows dance along the wall. The boy's breath rasped in the cradle behind her. "We won't survive this alone," she said. "You're not alone." She turned back. He was looking at her now, truly looking. Not guarded, not distant. His eyes were tired, but not empty. "Then don't leave," she said. The wind outside moaned like a warning. That night they stayed inside, together. Yolanda laid Tawaki on the pallet and fed him a thin broth with crushed beans, and her milk stirred in. He drank it in small gulps, his mouth sticky with need. Takaani cleaned his wounds in the basin without a word. She handed him clean cloth. He took it without thanks. There was no need. When the baby slept, she sat near the fire with her knees pulled to her chest. Takani crouched at the other end of the room, sharpening a small knife on a flat stone. "Tell me about her," Yolanda said. Takani didn't look up. "She was quiet," he said. Soft voice. "Laugh like water. Her name Kashani." He said it like a prayer. Yolanda nodded. "Mine was Miguel." He glanced up. "My boy," she said. "He lived 2 weeks, born too small, too soon. He didn't cry much either." Takani said nothing, but his knife slowed. "I buried him under the mesquite," she added. "Next to my grandmother." "Good place," he said. Yolanda swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "If I had just one more day, just one, I'd have given him this." She touched her chest, her arms, her heart. She looked at Tawake. "I don't think I get to choose anymore." Takani stood. He walked to the cradle, looked down at the boy. "He has your strength now," he said. She almost laughed, but it came out a sigh. "I don't feel strong," she said. "Strong doesn't feel." She thought about that long after he lay down on the floor near the fire and fell asleep, his hand resting lightly on the bow. She sat awake in the rocker, one hand on Tawake's back. Outside, the wind died. Inside, the fire burned low. In the morning, he would go. She could feel it already. Like watching the sun drop behind the canyon, knowing it would rise again somewhere else. They came for the child, but they saw a woman who would not beg. They didn't knock. At first, Yolanda thought it was wind again, or the goat rubbing its horns along the porch rail like it sometimes did. But this sound was deliberate wood on wood, the slow creak of boots on floorboards. She rose from the rocker without waking Tawake. The cradle was close to the hearth. Her back was warm from the fire. Her hands were cold. 3 shadows stood behind the window slats. She didn't have to guess. She moved quickly, quietly, placing her body between the door and the cradle. Her hand brushed the bow Takani had left propped against the wall. It wasn't loaded, but the weight steadied her. The door latch lifted. She reached it first and slammed it down. A man's voice, low, familiar. "Open up, Yolanda. Ramiro." "Not today," she said, loud enough to carry. There was a pause. She imagined him blinking in surprise, maybe laughing. He'd expected pleading, maybe tears. She gave him neither. "You've got a sick little creature in there," he said. "Some say it cries like a demon. Some say you do too." A rough laugh behind him, one of his men. Probably Jorge, always trailing Ramiro like a hound chasing scraps. Ramiro's voice turned smooth. "No one's here to hurt you. We just want to see the child. He's asleep. Then wake him." No. The silence after that word was deep. The kind of silence people fill with choices, dangerous ones. Another bootstep on the porch. Yolanda, Ramiro said again, softer. "You've always kept to yourself. Folks let you be out of respect for Esperanza. But this ain't just medicine and herbs. This is harboring a savage's blood. I feed a hungry baby. That's all. Not your baby, not your blood." Yolanda stepped closer to the door, every breath slow and tight. He is now. The creak of the porch shifted again. Someone moved to the side, maybe to circle the house. She grabbed the bow. Her arms were steady, her hands not so much. Still, she nocked an arrow. It wasn't a good one. It was rough-fletched, tied hastily with thread. But it would fly. She heard the whisper of straw as someone stepped near the window. "Leave," she said. "Before someone gets hurt, you draw on me," Ramiro asked. "On your neighbor, you stopped being my neighbor when you cursed my door." Another pause. Then the last thing she expected. The sound of a match. Through the slats, she saw the flare of flame against the wall. "Let's smoke her out," Jorge muttered. "If she won't give us the brat, we'll take the rest." Panic flared in her chest, but she forced it down. The bow was still in her grip. Tawake slept behind her, his little chest rising in rhythm. She turned toward the fire, reached in, pulled out the kettle of boiling broth, and when the door burst open, splintering under Jorge's boot, she threw it straight into his face. He screamed loud and high like a scalded hog, dropping his torch and clawing at his skin. Ramiro surged forward, but she was already there. Arrow drawn, shaking, pointed straight at his chest. "Next one's through your throat," she said. He froze. For 1 second the room held its breath. Then a second voice rang out, calm, sharp, from behind them. "That won't be necessary." Father Mateo stood at the edge of the porch, coat dusted with ash rosary wrapped around one hand like a rope. His horse stood behind him, reins slack. He looked from Jorge writhing on the ground to Yolanda, to the baby still asleep behind her. "Let her speak," the priest said. "All of you. Back." Ramiro turned his face, red jaw tight. "This is church business now." "It's a child," Mateo said. "And a woman you all trusted with your mother's wounds, your children's fevers. You'd burn her now because you fear what you don't understand." "She's feeding an Apache's spawn." "She's feeding a baby," Mateo replied. Ramiro spat on the floor. but he stepped back. Mateo looked to Yolanda. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then lowered the bow. "Yes." The priest stepped inside. His eyes swept the room, smoke curling toward the rafters, Jorge moaning outside the cradle near the fire. He walked over and looked at the child, then at her. "He's healing," he said. She nodded. "He would have died without you. Still might. Not today." They sat. Ramiro and his men waited outside, grumbling low like cattle before a storm. Yolanda told Mateo everything. Not all the pain, not the roots of it, but enough. The night Takani arrived. The baby, the milk, the crying, the silence. She didn't cry. Not this time. When she finished, Mateo was quiet. Then he said, "I'll speak to the alcalde and the others. I can't promise they'll stop coming, but I can stand beside you." She looked at him hard. Why he folded the rosary into his palm. "Because once a woman saved my mother's life. Your grandmother. When the town turned away, she stayed. I owe her. And you." Yolanda knotted a knot in her throat she refused to let out. Mateo stood, walked to the door. Ramiro scowled but stepped aside. Jorge sat in the dirt, half-conscious face red and blistered. "I suggest you ride home," Mateo said. No one argued. They rode off, muttering like whipped dogs. Yolanda stood in the doorway long after they left, the bow still in her grip, her arms still tense. Tawake cried, just a little. She turned back to him, fed him slowly, hands shaking. Later, she sat beside the hearth and whispered to the fire, "I won't run." The wind outside rose like applause, and in the trees beyond the house, eyes watched, quiet, waiting. I saw him on the ridge, bow in hand, but it was his silence that warned me something was breaking. The trees were quieter than usual. No birds, no insects, no wind worth noting. Just that heavy, watchful stillness that sometimes came before a dust storm or a death. Yolanda felt it the moment she stepped outside to hang the wash. The baby was tied to her chest, his breath warm against her collarbone. He'd slept well after the fire and fear. Too well, maybe. She kept checking to see if he was still breathing. The breeze that touched her face was dry and carried the scent of ash left over from Jorge's torch, now a charred stain on the porch boards. She had scrubbed it with water and vinegar. Still the shape remained, like a wound that refused to heal. She looked toward the ridge before she even knew why. And there he was. Takani. He stood halfway up the slope, barely visible among the tall brush and stone. Bow in hand posture, still eyes trained not on her, but somewhere beyond. A sentinel. She raised her hand slightly. He didn't move, didn't signal. She understood. Danger, but not yet. Inside, she laid Tawake in his basket and moved about the cabin with a rhythm that was half habit, half defense. She ground corn, split wood, boiled a thick broth with crushed beans and dried barrage leaves. Her eyes flicked to the window every few minutes. Takani didn't come down, but he didn't leave either. She fed Tawake once the sun had reached the high part of the sky. He drank with more strength than days before, even held her finger longer this time. His cheeks were still too hollow, his arms too thin, but he clung like a vine to life, twisting toward warmth. When he slept again, she stepped out and walked to the edge of the clearing. He was gone. The ridge sat empty, but she could feel him nearby, still watching. Like he had pressed himself into the dirt and wind, waiting for whatever came next. That evening, Mateo returned. He rode up alone, had pulled low, a satchel tied to his saddle. His horse was covered in dust legs, trembling. She opened the door before he dismounted. "You shouldn't be here. They think I'm at the mission out east," he said, handing her the satchel. "Food, medicine, papers, Papers, your name, the child's. Just in case. She took them without looking inside. Her fingers trembled. So you think it's coming? I think Ramiro's been shamed. That's a dangerous man. She didn't argue. Mateo stepped inside. His eyes passed over the cradle, the hanging herbs, the bow by the door. He's stronger, he said. She nodded. He ate well today. You should name him. Her throat tightened. He has a name. Mateo raised an eyebrow. His father calls him Tawake, she said. It means hawk. The priest smiled faintly. It suits him. He didn't stay long. Said he had to ride north before sundown. As he mounted his horse, he paused. Keep the papers close. And don't wait to run if you have to. I told you. I'm not running. I'm not asking you to, he said. Just don't die for pride. She closed the door after him and bolted it. The baby stirred in the cradle. She lifted him into her arms and held him against her shoulder, rocking gently. He made a soft sound, not quite a cry. A breath trying to become voice. You don't have to be brave yet, she whispered. That's my job. Night fell sharp and cold. No knock came, no hooves, no threats. But still the unease crept under the door like smoke. She checked the windows twice, then again. She wrapped Tawake tighter. The fire burned low, aglow in the stones. Just before dawn, the dream came. Her grandmother's voice, low and urgent. The scent of eucalyptus and blood. A storm outside. Firelight on the walls. Don't wait for kindness, Esperanza whispered. Make your own. Yolanda woke in a sweat. Takani stood by the hearth. She jerked upright, grabbing the bow, but he raised a hand quickly, palm open, empty. I knocked, he said. You didn't answer. You're bleeding. He was. A long scratch down his arm and a deeper cut at his side. She ushered him to the chair without argument. His tunic was torn, one sleeve soaked through. He winced as he sat, but said nothing. She cleaned the wound quickly, efficiently. Her hands worked without thought. Her mind spun. What happened, scouts? Military number town men. Ramiro's cousins. 2 with guns. 1 with dogs. Her stomach turned. Did they see you, maybe? You can't keep doing this. He looked at her, his eyes darker than usual. You said don't leave. That's not what I meant. He watched her bandage his side. You meant stay when it's safe. I meant stay when it matters. She tied the cloth tight. He didn't flinch. Tawake is strong, he said after a moment. You made him that. We both did. He hesitated. I want to stay. The words felt too big for the room. She stood slowly, the air between them thick. You want to stay? She asked. He nodded. If you'll let me. She didn't answer. Not then. Instead, she walked to the cradle and lifted the baby. His eyes opened halfway. His lips searched, then latched onto her breast without fuss. A rhythm now. A bond carved by days and nights and danger. She fed him Takani, watching silently from the chair. And for the first time, the room didn't feel broken. She whispered, We're not safe yet. I know. But we're together. He nodded. Outside, dawn crept over the ridge like a slow hand brushing the earth. And from the far edge of the trees, something shifted. Not a bird, not wind, but eyes. Still watching. Waiting. 15. Apache came without weapons, but their eyes carried the weight of centuries. The first sound Yolanda heard was not the thunder of hooves or the crack of rifles. It was the murmur. Low voices, many of them drifting up from the valley like fog. She stood at the window with Tawake pressed against her shoulder, his small hand knotted in her blouse. Takani was already outside, half hidden behind the mesquite bow slung across his back, eyes fixed on the road. They're coming, he said, not turning. She nodded. Her mouth was dry. She'd known this moment would arrive, but knowing didn't make it lighter. The murmur grew into footsteps. Not hurried, not scattered, ordered. When the first figures emerged from the dust, Yolanda's breath caught. They came on foot. Men in buckskin and worn cotton hair braided, or loose faces painted not for war, but for ceremony. No rifles, no drawn blades. Only staffs carved with symbols she didn't know, and blankets folded over one arm. 15 of them moving as one body, calm and deliberate. At their head walked an older man, tall, despite the years etched into his face. His hair was streaked with gray and tied back with a strip of red cloth. His eyes were sharp, heavy with knowledge. He carried no weapon, only a staff darkened by age and use. Takani stepped forward, lowering his bow. He pressed his fist to his chest. "Nalinchi," he said quietly. Yolanda's heart pounded. She'd heard the name in whispers, Takani's father. A chief. A man who'd survived more bloodshed than most could imagine. She stepped out onto the porch, the baby in her arms. The men stopped at the edge of the clearing. No one crossed the line of stones still circling her cabin. Nalinchi raised his hand in greeting. "We come in peace." His Spanish was slow but clear. Takaani moved to stand beside her. She could feel the tension in his body coiled tight like a drawn string. "What do you want?" Yolanda asked, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. Nalinchi's gaze shifted to the child. His expression softened just a fraction. "We come for the woman who fed my grandson." The words settled into the air, heavy and undeniable. Behind Yolanda, movement. She turned just as the first townspeople arrived, Ramiro at the front, flanked by half a dozen men carrying rifles. Their faces were pale eyes darting from the Apache men to the baby in her arms. "What's this?" Ramiro barked. "You bring them here now." Nalinchi didn't look at him. Takani spoke instead. "They come unarmed." So did the wolves once Ramiro snapped, until they tore throats. Yolanda stepped forward before Takaani could respond. "They came because of me," she said. "If there's blame, put it on me." Ramiro sneered. "Gladly." But the women of the village were gathering now too, Doña Esperanza leaning on her cane, 2 sisters clutching shawls, even a few children peering from behind skirts. The air thickened with tension, fear pressing against curiosity. Nalinchi lifted his staff slightly. The Apache men behind him stopped as one. "My people and yours have buried too many children," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We did not come to dig more graves." Silence followed. Father Mateo emerged from the crowd, his face pale but resolute. He stepped between Ramiro and the Apache, line hands raised. "They came in peace," he said. "We hear them." Ramiro's jaw tightened. "This is our land, and that child is alive because of her." Mateo replied, gesturing toward Yolanda. Nalinchi inclined his head. She fed him when his mother lay in the earth, when his father had nothing left to give. He looked directly at Yolanda now. "You did not ask who he was. You only fed him." Her throat burned. She shifted Tawake higher on her shoulder. The baby stirred, then let out a small sound, half cry, half sigh. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Doña Esperanza stepped forward, eyes fixed on the child. "He's thin," she murmured. "Too thin. He was dying," Yolanda said. "He's not now." Nalinchi nodded once. "Not now." Ramiro scoffed. "So what, you expect us to thank her for helping our enemy?" Nalinchi repeated softly. "Is a baby your enemy?" Ramiro hesitated. Just a moment. The Apache men did not move. They stood patient, unyielding. "We ask for the woman's safety," Nalinchi continued, "and the child's. And if we say no," Ramiro challenged. Nalinchi's gaze hardened not with rage but with resolve. Then you will choose the path of blood. But not today. A murmur rippled through the villagers. Fear. Doubt. Takani spoke again. We do not want war. Yolanda looked at him sharply. He met her gaze. We want him to live. She pressed her cheek to the baby's head, tears blurring her vision. Father Mateo took a step forward. Let us speak, he said. All of us. Ramiro looked around. At the women, at the Apache men, at the child whose breath rasped softly in Yolanda's arms. He spat into the dirt. Fine. They gathered in a rough circle. No one sat. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill. Yolanda spoke of the first night, the weak cry, the milk that wouldn't stop. She spoke plainly without drama. The truth didn't need dressing. Takani spoke of Kashani's death, of running, of hunger. Nalinchi spoke of loss, of how many children his people had buried, of how war fed itself on fear until there was nothing left but bones. Then Doña Esperanza spoke. I delivered half the babies in this village, she said. I know hunger. I know dying. And I know a mother when I see one. Her gaze rested on Yolanda. The air shifted. Ramiro said nothing for a long time. His face was rigid, caught between anger and something else, something like doubt. At last he said, We'll talk. Not forgiveness, not peace, but not violence. It was enough. As the gathering broke, the Apache men remained where they were, patient as stone. Nalinchi approached Yolanda one last time. You have the heart of our people, he said quietly. Whatever blood runs in your veins. She bowed her head. I only did what I could. That is everything, he replied. They turned and walked back the way they'd come, slow and deliberate, leaving behind a clearing full of people who no longer knew what they believed. Takani stood beside her, his hand brushing hers. Yolanda looked down at Tawake, who slept through it all. For the first time since the stones appeared, the air felt different. Not safe, but open. I didn't know what to call it, what sat between us that night, but it was shaped like grief, and it held us like family. The cabin was quiet save for the soft wheeze of Tawake sleeping and the crackle of firewood settling into coals. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the dark branches, clicking like dry bones against the roof. Yolanda sat near the hearth, with her legs curled under her, watching the flames throw dancing shadows up the walls. Takaani sat across from her, his back against the far wall, one leg stretched out, the other, drawn up, elbow resting on his knee. He hadn't said much since Nalinchi and the others left. She hadn't either. There was too much between them now to name. She traced her fingers along the rim of the tin cup in her lap. The tea had gone cold. Tawake let out a soft grunt in his sleep, and then stilled again. I didn't think they'd come, she said finally. Takani didn't look up. They had to. I know, she said. But I didn't think they would. He nodded slowly. My father's proud. But he remembers starvation. She shifted, staring into the fire. I'm not proud. I just didn't know what else to do. Takani finally met her eyes. You did what no one else would. They sat in silence again, but it was softer this time. Not like before when silence meant fear or waiting. This one settled over them like a blanket at the end of a long day. I was 6 when I learned to skin a rabbit, she said. My grandmother made me do it even though I cried the whole time. Takani raised his eyebrows. That why you won't eat them now? She smiled faintly. No. That's because she forgot one in the cellar once. Took a week to find the smell. He laughed just once, low and surprised. It startled her more than it should have. She hadn't heard him laugh. Not truly. Not since he first arrived, a man hunted by grief. Tell me something about her, Yolanda said almost too softly. Takani's gaze dropped to the floor. Kashani was stubborn, he said. Didn't like needles. Refused to sew, but she could snare birds in her sleep. She talked to trees like they were cousins. Yolanda leaned in. What did they say back? She said they told her when snow was coming. Or sickness. Did they? He nodded once. They always did. A log shifted in the fire. Sparks rose. She named him Tawake, he added, voice almost breaking, because he never slept, eyes always open, watching everything. Yolanda pressed her hand to the baby's back. His breath fluttered against her palm. She chose well, she said. Takaani's throat moved as he swallowed. She died fast, arrow to the chest. She didn't fall hard, but I knew it was over. She smiled, though. Last thing she did was smile. Yolanda closed her eyes. She could picture it. The silence of the desert, the sudden violence, then that terrible, gentle ending. I buried Miguel myself, she said. The priest wouldn't come. Said it was too late. I dug the hole with a spoon because the ground was hard, and I didn't have a spade. Takani looked at her then full. They sat with that ache between them, not touching, not needing to. I hated him for dying, she whispered, even though he was just a baby. I hated everyone who lived, Takani replied. They didn't apologize for it, didn't explain. Yolanda looked over at the cradle. I didn't know I had anything left until he cried. I didn't know I could stay still until he slept in my arms. Tawake stirred as if hearing them. Yolanda moved to him, lifting him gently from the cradle. He opened one eye, blinked, and nestled into her collarbone. His warmth settled her. She crossed back and sat beside the fire again, closer to Takaani now. The baby reached toward the heat with a sleepy hand, then let it fall against her chest. He's growing, Takaani said. He's fighting, she said. Takaani turned toward her, resting his arm along the bench. What happens now, he asked. She didn't answer right away. The fire popped. The wind sighed outside. Now she said we teach him to walk, to speak both our languages, to chew dry meat without complaining, to count the stars. Takani looked at her carefully. That's a lot. He'll have time. They watched the flames in silence again, and then without planning it, she leaned into him. Not fully, just enough to feel the shape of him beside her. Solid, quiet. There. He didn't move away. His hand found the edge of the blanket and pulled it over her shoulders, then over the baby, then himself. They sat like that until the fire burned low. Yolanda didn't know what to call the thing between them. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was shaped like grief. It held them like family. And it didn't let go. I saw the fire in his eyes before I saw the smoke on the hill. Tawake laughed for the first time that morning. Not a full laugh, just a sudden hiccup of joy, a sound bursting from his throat, as the goat licked his foot and bleated in confusion. Yolanda dropped the bucket she was holding, water sloshing onto her skirt, but she didn't care. She crouched beside the boy, lifted him into her arms, and pressed her face to his neck. You laugh like thunder, she whispered, small but loud. He squirmed against her chest, his hand closing around a lock of her hair. His skin was cool, his cheeks rounder than they'd been. His strength no longer startled her, it comforted her. Each noise, each stubborn refusal to sleep or eat without fuss, each kick of his tiny heels was proof that he'd chosen to stay. Takani leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He likes the goat more than he likes me. He's smart, she replied without looking up. Takani chuckled. Maybe. It had been a good week. quiet. Days filled with chores, warmth, and the steady rebuilding of something Yolanda hadn't known was broken until it began to mend. The village had kept its distance. Ramiro hadn't shown his face. Even Luisa, who once brought baskets of dried fruit and news, now passed by without stopping. But Yolanda didn't mind. She preferred silence to pity. And she had her hands full, Tawake crawling now, his legs pumping like a colt, knocking over water bowls and climbing into the woodpile. Mateo came once, bringing a jar of honey and a bundle of letters no one had asked for. He stayed only a few minutes, said little, watched the child with something like awe. "He's becoming," he said simply. Then he left. They were becoming too, Yolanda thought. A trio where once there'd been only ghosts. That night, after Tawake finally gave in to sleep, Yolanda sat by the fire and let herself breathe. Takaani knelt nearby, sharpening a new arrowhead, the stone scraping softly in the dim light. "You sleep like a man who doesn't think he's being hunted anymore," she said. He paused. "Am I, you tell me?" He set the stone down. "For now, no." She leaned back against the wall. "I can live with for now." A silence followed, deep, contented. Then the air shifted. It wasn't the wind. Yolanda turned toward the window. A faint orange pulse rose just above the horizon, flickering behind the trees. "Fire," she said. Takani was already at the door. They stepped outside together. The night air was dry, tinged with smoke. To the north, along the ridgeline, flames danced in jagged waves. Takaani's jaw tightened. "That's near the river." Yolanda looked down at the baby, still asleep, unaware. "Is it them?" she asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He grabbed the bow and a handful of arrows. She gathered water and cloth, soaking them just in case the wind shifted. An hour passed. The fire didn't come closer, but neither did it fade. Yolanda stood by the door while Takani paced the yard like a restless wolf, eyes fixed on the hills. Finally, he stopped. "I need to see," he said. "You can't go alone. If it's what I think it is, I can't stay either." She felt something close around her throat. "Takaani." "I saw the fire in his eyes before I saw the smoke on the hill," he said. Ramiro didn't disappear. He just waited. She wanted to argue, but the truth sat between them, burning like the flames on the ridge. "You'll come back?" she asked. He walked to her and took her hand, rough and warm. "I'll always come back." He kissed the top of Tawaki's head, then hers. And then he disappeared into the dark. Yolanda didn't sleep. She lay beside the baby with one hand on his chest, and her ears tuned to every crackle and creak outside. The night stretched long and cruel. At dawn, the fire was out. But Takani had not returned. She dressed quickly, fed Tawake what she could, tied him close, and headed toward the hills. The trees were scorched at their edges, smoke still curling in the underbrush. Blackened stumps lined the trail. It hadn't reached the village yet, but it had meant to. Half a mile up, she found him. Takaani stood with 3 others from his village men she recognized from the day Nalinchi came. One of them had a bloody gash across his shoulder. Another leaned on a broken spear. Takaani's tunic was torn. Ash stained his face. He saw her and walked forward, gaze heavy. "It was them," he said. "Ramiro and 5 others. They tried to burn the path to the river, cut off water, smoke us out." She looked past him to the smoldering ground. "Anyone die?" "No," he said. "Not this time. Not this time." She handed him the water skin. He drank, then crouched to look at Tawake. The baby stared up at him, then reached for his nose. "You didn't cry when I left," Takaani said softly. "He's saving it for when you try to leave again," Yolanda muttered. Takani smiled, tired but real. We stopped them for now, he said. But he's not done. Then neither are we. They stood together watching the smoke drift east. The land had changed again, scarred but not broken. Like them. What Ramiro didn't understand was that the boy had already chosen his blood, he'd chosen us. The sun rose hard and fast, blistering the ridge and laying long shadows across the yard. The wind was wrong again, dry and sharp, carrying that sour scent of rust and smoke. Yolanda felt it in her teeth before she saw anything, a dull vibration in her jaw that warned of movement. She stepped out with Tawake on her hip and found Takaani already saddling the horse. How far, she asked. Too close, he replied. He'd barely slept the night before. After the fire, after the smoke settled, they'd taken turns keeping watch. She'd seen the shift in him, alert but quieter, like something in him had coiled tighter and hadn't let go. She touched his arm. I want to go with you. He looked up. No. You said we don't run. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to keep him alive. Tawake was chewing on her braid, blinking up at Takaani like he'd already forgotten what fear was. They've seen his face, Yolanda said. They know his name now. He's not a secret anymore. Takaani finished cinching the strap and turned. He's not a secret, but he's still a child. And we're still his parents. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. She hadn't planned to. It just came simple and clear. Takaani didn't blink. Then one of us needs to stay. She hated that he was right. She also hated that he would be the one walking toward danger while she stood behind a bolted door with a baby in her arms and a bow she barely knew how to use. He kissed her before he left. Not desperate. Not like goodbye. Just enough to say, I'm still here. She watched him ride east until the dust swallowed him. 3 hours later, Ramiro arrived. He didn't knock this time either. He came on foot, which was unusual. His boots were coated in ash, his hat pulled low. Behind him were 2 men she didn't recognize, older, gaunter, armed. One carried a rusted shotgun. The other had a hunting knife strapped to his thigh. Yolanda opened the door before they reached it. Tawake was awake, calm, sucking a strip of leather she'd tied to his wrist. She didn't tell him to hush. She wanted Ramiro to hear the sound of a child inside this house. Morning, he said, voice too light. She stepped onto the porch, not bothering to hide the bow. I thought you were busy lighting fires. He grinned without teeth. Well, now. We all do things we regret when we're scared. What are you afraid of now? He glanced at the baby, then back at her. That child. And what he brings with him. What he brings is hunger, sleep, and the need for clean blankets. That's it. Ramiro's face hardened. You think this is about one baby? I think it's always about one baby, she said. That's how all this starts and ends. The man with the shotgun shifted his weight. We're not here to talk. I gathered, she said. She didn't move. Neither did they. You're not on your land anymore, Ramiro said. It's been claimed. By who? People who don't forget. She looked down at Tawake. He won't remember you. He doesn't have to. Ramiro stepped forward, and that was when she drew the bow. It was slow, deliberate. Not fast like a threat, just quiet and true. I don't need to be good, she said. I just need to be close. Ramiro stopped. I won't kill a woman, he muttered, but you'll try to take a child from one. He looked past her into the house. She knew he was calculating how far the door was, whether she'd really shoot, whether Takaani was still nearby. He didn't know that he was already too late. I know his blood, Ramiro said. No matter what you say. You know what people told you. But blood isn't what makes a child. Love is, Time is, Ramiro scoffed. You think he'll grow up calling you mother? I don't need him to call me anything. He already reaches for me when he's scared. That's enough. Behind her, Tawake let out a small sound, a sharp little breath that wasn't quite a cry. She didn't flinch. Ramiro stared at her. Then something flickered in his expression. Doubt. Or maybe exhaustion. Don't make this worse than it has to be, he said. She didn't lower the bow. What you don't understand, she said, voice firm, is that the boy already made his choice. He chose me. He chose Takaani. He chose us. Ramiro didn't speak. The man with the shotgun shifted again, but he didn't raise it. Finally, Ramiro stepped back. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe Yolanda replied. But I'll do it with him in my arms. They left without another word. She watched until they disappeared past the tree line. Only then did she lower the bow. Her hands were shaking. Her legs, too. She walked back inside and bolted the door. Tawake blinked up at her wide-eyed. You're safe, she whispered. You're mine. She fed him slowly, wrapped him tight, and held him until he slept. Then she sat by the door bow beside her and waited for Takaani to return. Some endings don't come with thunder or fire. Some come quiet like a baby's breath, and you only know it's over when you finally let go of the fear. The first thing Yolanda saw was his silhouette. Takaani rode in from the west just as the light began to sink behind the hills. The wind caught his coat and hair, the sun throwing gold around him like dust. She stood on the porch, with Tawake pressed against her hip, one hand gripping the post, the other shading her eyes. He looked tired, but not broken. There was no blood on him, no fire in the air, just the weight of something finished. She didn't move until he was close enough to look her in the eyes. It's done, she asked. He nodded. Ramiro won't come back. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to know what words were said, what lines were crossed, what bargains made or warnings delivered. It didn't matter now. She stepped down, met him at the bottom of the porch. He dismounted slowly, his legs stiff. Tawake reached out for him before he could say a word. Takaani took him in his arms, like it was the easiest thing in the world. The boy let out a soft grunt, settled his head on Takaani's shoulder, and went still. Every time you leave, he grows, Yolanda said. I noticed. They walked inside without speaking. Later, after Tawake was fed and asleep on the cot near the fire, they sat at the table. The window was cracked open. Crickets hummed in the distance and the smell of juniper drifted in. He had followers, Takaani said. Not many, but enough. Still not any more. Some walked away. Others saw what he really was. And the rest, Takaani didn't answer. She nodded anyway. She understood. People made choices. Some carried those choices until they burned through every part of them. Others let go in time. I never wanted this, he said. Any of it. I know. But I wouldn't trade it. She looked at him, really looked. His eyes were clearer now, the shadows there, but not heavy, like old pain that no longer bled. You're staying, she said. I'm already here. She stood and walked to the cradle. Tawake was sleeping on his back, one fist balled near his face lips, twitching in some dream. I used to think I'd leave too, she whispered. After Miguel, after everything. I thought maybe I'd walk until there was no one left to bury. He watched her quiet. But I stayed, because someone cried, and I didn't know how to walk away from that. She brushed a hand over the baby's brow. You never told me what his name means, she said. Takaani rose, came to stand beside her. Tawake, he said, voice low. It means hawk, eyes open, always watching, always above. He sees everything. He will. They sat together on the floor beside the child. The fire crackled low. The cabin didn't feel like a shelter anymore. It felt like a home. She leaned into him, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "No one will forget what happened," she said. "Not the town. Not your people. They don't have to forget. They just have to stop bleeding." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the trees. It didn't sound like fear anymore. It sounded like breath. In the morning, the rooster crowed twice. Yolanda rose early, made coffee, then stepped outside to find the sun just rising over the ridge. The light was soft, the ground damp from night dew. No fire, no footsteps, no threats, just air and earth. Takani came out behind her with tawake slung across his chest in a wrap she'd sewn from a flour sack. The boy was half awake, blinking into the day, his small hand grasping his father's thumb. They stood quietly, all three looking at the sky. "Some endings don't come with thunder or fire," Yolanda said. "Some come quiet." Takani nodded. This one did. She reached for his hand. He didn't let go. And when the wind moved through the brush and carried the baby's breath into the morning air, it felt like something sacred, like peace. And for once, no one was watching from the trees. No one needed to. The educational lesson learned from this story is that compassion offered quietly and without expectation can reshape lives even when fear and prejudice are loud. It reminds us that family is not defined only by blood, but by the steady acts of care we choose to give when it would be easier to turn away. The story also suggests that standing firm in small moral choices often matters more than winning arguments or proving others wrong. In the long run, patience, courage, and simple decency leave deeper marks than anger ever could.